starting point for any scrapbook page for me is faith. Faith that if I begin moving my photos around on the canvas, the story and the design will emerge. Watch me make Happy Easter and see where my faith took me on this day. See my starts and misstarts. See my movement forward in the final result. Along the way, learn about layout design and figure out what story you want to record from your own life. This is Debbie Hodge from GetItScrap.com. Today I wanted to make a page with just some pretty pictures from Easter. I also want to scrapbook pictures of us sitting around with our friends on Easter. And my table wasn't all that fancy, but still I think it captures a certain idea of spring when you get the Easter or the Passover table with the flowers on it. And it's a good excuse to use papers with pretty flowers and springy colors. One way I like to work when I have two photos lots of times is to just crop them to the same size. I think these aren't exactly the same height, but they're the same width. And either line them up one above the other, or if they're portrait oriented, next to each other. So I'm starting out with these on the page, and I'm looking for ways to incorporate lots of papers and lots of the pretty baubles in the kits. I have the new Dear Lizzie, well, I don't know if it's new for us digital folk, the Enchanted line from AC Digitals by Dear Lizzie, and I also have a cool looking retro Easter kit called Eclectic Easter by Just Jamie. So I want an excuse to use these papers and all these fun little flares and buttons and to get a feeling of spring and just capture what our table looked like this year. So I've got my two photos on the page, one above the other, and I'm looking through my papers. I added a narrow white mat to each of them. I'm a digital scrapbooker, so that means adding a white stroke. I go with about 12 pixels, and I added shadowing to it. But that would be the equivalent of a white mat if you're a paper scrapbooker. I have some papers that are actually quite different in styling. The Dear Lizzie papers are really more bright and modern, and the Eclectic Easter papers have a more shabby look to them. I'm not going to use very much of that shabby paper because I like the bright and clean better, but I want a little bit of it to go with all those embellishments that came in the kit. As you can see, those flares that I'm pulling out right now go with that. So my idea is I put some paper behind my photos, and I'm working on building a shape that slopes from the top right corner down and out, so it's sort of a sideways triangle. And I want it to sort of feel not precise and geometric, but organic, and like it's just a cluster of pretty fun things like an Easter bouquet. So in addition to putting some papers behind my photos, I took one strip of paper and made it as a shelf. It's extending out into the left side of the paper, and it's positioned just at the top of the lower photo, and I'm starting to build my cluster of embellishments and buttons and flair on top of that. At this point I'm realizing that I want to mat the two photos on a little bit different paper than that pink plaid, and I'm looking for some graph paper. Something that, I don't know, feels right. I tried this by Jenny Bolin, and it's a little too heavy, a little too retro for that. So I ended up going with the crepe paper, Pretty Party patterned paper. I love patterned paper. I used to sew when I was young, and it's got a nice nostalgic feeling for me. And now I want to keep building this cluster that's sort of diagonally spreading out. And it occurred to me that banners would be a nice way to do that. And there's these banner templates from Anna Asmus. They're actually called word label templates. So I'm thinking about how I can put some of those on the page. I went with 3 because 3 is a great number in design. And I'm going to clip papers to those eventually. But right now I'm just picking out which ones I might use. And of course placing them to start building that shape. I need a place to put my title. I had first pulled out this word art, this Happy Easter word art, and I'm thinking I need a foundation behind it, something to back it up, and a doily would do that really nicely because it has a curve to it, and it also goes with the idea of a dinner table. I realized I wasn't liking the look of that word art, so I'm going to try and find some alphas and do something a little different for the title. I decided to go use some alpha snips, some little bitty squares with alpha letters on them, and these are from the Eclectic Easter kit that I'm using already. So I grabbed the the yellow on red, well, pinkish red, because I thought it would stand out nice. And I've arranged the word happy, and I realized I could use this flair that says Easter on it, so I can combine the two for my title. And now a lot of the making of this page is playing with little items and placing them and just getting them in the right place, tweaking them. This is a page that's just a lot about play and moving things around and just spending time with my page. I've added more oomph or bulk to my shelf. Another piece of patterned paper, the blue patterned paper that I trimmed to be a wider strip behind that first narrow strip I'd put down for my shelf. And I'm clipping some papers now to those banner pieces. I'm rethinking some of my choices now, trying some different papers. Part of making the page is getting the right balance of dark colors and light colors, of density, of more open space, and I felt like those darker pink-red alphas for happy were just too heavy and too dark. The other thing is I have that line of red lace there in my shelf, and they were close in color to it, so I felt like there wasn't enough contrast between the two. So now I'm going to use these lighter pink alphas, and I can use the red lace as a shelf to support them. And it's time to just go on a button hunt, go on a paper hunt, fill it all in. I'm pulling buttons that are spring colors, yellow, pink, light blue, springy yellowy green, and I'm arranging them to create that downward diagonal and then sort of coming back in at the bottom, so a lopsided triangle on its side. When I looked at the page at this point, all of a sudden I didn't like it. It was just too many colors, too much confusion, and I decided I should pick just two colors to work with on my buttons. I already had a lot of pink, and there's that strong blue in the Easter flair, the two pieces of Easter flair, the one that says Easter and the one that has the diagonal stripes. So I'm just going to pull buttons that are in pinks and blues now and work to arrange those for a more cohesive look. At this point I went on a misguided feather hunt. I thought feathers would be nice to add because they're trendy, 1, and 2, there's chicks at Easter time. And then 3, I thought if I found a long feather it could buoy up my shelf. It could be just one more layer that emphasized that shelf there, supporting all those little bits and bobs. But I didn't find a feather that I liked, and I ended up deciding to go with more, maybe try out some floral bits. Somehow something was missing. That whole area where I'm layering the flares and buttons feels like it needs some layers behind the flare and the button besides just that pattern paper. There's not enough clarity, there's not enough weight, it's just not working. I added a few stickers from Amy Tangerine and Dear Lizzie kits. Just some pretty doodly, light spring colored kind of items. I added a strip of paper and horizontal chevron rub-ons down at the bottom to create a shelf that echoes that shelf up in the middle, but it's much shorter. It doesn't go as far over to the left as the one above it does. But it gives that idea of a step down. It gives a little more support to all those elements. It gives the design structure. I'm still fussing with this profusion of pink and blue round bits, this idea that I had that they would burst out. I'm still not liking the way it looks. I added my journaling up at the top, just typed right above that block of photos. There's not much journaling because this page is really more about me playing with all these pretty items. And I'm also working to build a cluster over at bottom right. So I have the leaves already over in my explosion of round bits, so I'm going to put another leaf cluster over there to echo that. I'm still trying to figure out how to get these pink and blue buttons and flares and flowers to all work and to feel like a profusion and yet not be chaotic. So I'm trying to think about the whole shape overall in this effort to get things to feel good. And it occurs to me that I'd like the top to come to more of a peak. And I remembered I had these flourishy chipboards by Katie Petite. So I'm going to top off the photo block with that so it's less blocky and got a curve to it, and put a pink brad right over top of that. And then those two bits of leaves over at bottom right, that cluster needs a finishing touch. I first thought about putting maybe some cross stitches to hold them down, but then I found a nice pink tie to tie them together and to echo all those pinks that are all over the place. And finally I hit upon what the problem is, why this profusion isn't working. And I think it's because there's not enough contrast. Everything's just a mess. They aren't set upon a base against which they contrast. It's really busy, and also there's not enough weight to support them all, and doilies turn out to be the solution to that for me. So I'm layering some doilies back behind those buttons now. I also added some stitching, some horizontal stitching at the top and at the bottom to emphasize the horizontal shelves in there. So now the final tweaks are in an effort to get all of my elements as a whole to make a shape that feels balanced on the canvas and that defines a nice shape on its own and that defines nice white space around it. And when I say nice, what I mean is balanced, harmonious. And so I'm jiggling things just a little bit on the page to get that shape that I want, to get things positioned where I want, and I'm finally done with my page Happy Easter, which is a fun page that let me play with product and pretty photos. When I began Happy Easter, I knew that I wanted to make a page that included lots of buttons and pretty bits in a profusion alongside 2 photos from the Easter table. I started with 2 same-size photos. It took me a bit of time to figure out that I needed to limit my color choices and make a foundation for those many little bits in order to make a piece that was unified rather than chaotic. Beginning a page with 2 photos is a common starting point for me. You can learn to make great-looking pages efficiently by using this kind of a starter at getatscrap.com/scrapbookcoach.